And we are live. Great. Kia ora tato. Welcome back to another Q&A style event here at Digital Boost. I'm Georgia Hatzis, your host. I'm so excited today. I had a really nice chat with Simon Vaughan, who we've got here from Huber Social. We're going to be talking about best practice principles in social impact measurement. I know that sounds like a big mouthful. Like, what does that mean? What are we talking about? Simon's going to walk us through it. Basically, when I think about this, Simon, and not to even start the conversation off now, but might as well, right? When I think about social impact and I think about business and I think about measuring our progress, I think traditionally we've talked about like financial value. Where are the numbers? What are they doing? How do we make more? Why am I low here? And as we're seeing, I think especially the pandemic showed us where balance is necessary.
Mhm.
And also, business is shifting, the world is shifting, and we're starting to see how social impact is really making us stronger, making us more money, and really enhancing our businesses. So I want to hear all about what you have to share with us. And I know the people who are watching live want to hear all about it. If you have questions, please feed them through the Q&A. And or if you're watching on our socials, pop your comments into the socials, and I will keep an eye out for those, and I will weave those through the presentation. Simon, welcome. Nice to
Hello.
meet you.
Yeah, lovely to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Simon Vaughan, and I work for a company called Huber Social, like Uber with an H. And we are a social impact measurement agency. So we help anyone that works with people, that could be government, not-for-profits, or businesses that have programs with people. We help them to measure the effectiveness of what they're doing in the hope that they can be more effective and do more good in the world. So yeah, I'm going to be running you through a presentation today. So I'm just going to share my screen. Let's hope that, and oops, Georgia, you can just look. Yep, hopefully you can see that now.
Looks good to me. Yep.
Awesome. So the first thing I want to do today is just acknowledge that I'm joining today from the lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation in Sydney, Australia. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future. But at Huber, we also acknowledge that our framework for measuring social impact is based around the idea of well-being, and it's we think kind of silly to talk about with well-being without talking about the thousands of years of knowledge that come before us from First Nations people who have been developing and harnessing knowledge that foster the well-being of people in place. And just we like to acknowledge how much Indigenous thinking has informed the conceptualization, development, and refinement of our well-being methodology, and recognize the critical contribution of First Nations people to not only our work, but to this field in general. So it's really important for us. So we're going to start. This is what we're going through today. The introductions is really just for me to talk a little bit about who I am in Huber Social and why. We have something to say on this topic. We're then going to talk about the social impact measurement landscape, and then some principles for social impact measurements. So we'll get to what we mean by that in a second. And then, yeah, questions at the end, but obviously feel free to drop them in throughout. And Georgia has already said that she'll keep an eye on the chat box. And if you've got questions, she'll feed them through to me as she thinks appropriate. So yeah, let's jump in. So just a quick bit about Huber Social. So we work in more than 10 countries across the world. We work with some of the world's most vulnerable communities, but we also work with a lot of businesses. So we've got some logos down here of people we've worked with, big insurance companies like QBE, Outwork Australia is an employment company over here. We've done all sorts of projects as well then with not-for-profit sector. We work in New Zealand Air Trail with a whole bunch of organizations. So with Trust Waikato, New Zealand Child Cancer Foundation. So lots of experience in different places. And we're recognized locally and globally for our integrity. So we have been a measurement partner for an impact investment summit over here. We've got partners at Oxford. We're a member of the UN SDG Impact Standards Assurance Advisory Group. Basically, this slide is just to say that we have some idea of what we're talking about. And so the things that I'm telling you, they're not totally made up. They come from a place of some sort of knowledge and standard. And this piece here is really the one we're going to be talking about today, that we led the drafting of the Standards Australia Measuring and Valuing Social Impact Handbook. So As the
Simon,
world of
I'm just going to cut you off for a second just to say not only is this showing us that you know what you're talking about, but it's also that we're also good people. Like we're also good people. And
yeah,
not to put anybody off, right? Because
yeah,
this
yeah,
is like we are all trying to do good in the world in all of our businesses. You don't have
yeah,
to be a
yeah,
social business in order to do good in the world.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we led the drafting of the Standards Australia Measuring and Valuing Social Impact Handbook, and that's where the principles that we're going to talk through today come from. So we'll talk a bit more about that soon. However, let's start with why do we need to measure social impact? What is the problem we are trying to solve? And Georgia gave a wonderful introduction to that at the start there. Essentially, that when it comes to progress, we're not measuring what matters. So, for the longest time across the world, the only measure of success that we've set for ourselves for any part of society, honestly, not just businesses, like governments, whatever it is, it's all just about being about GDP. So how much money is being made and spent in the economy. But a lot of people are coming to realize that GDP is not a good measure of performance. It doesn't measure our well-being. And in fact, that gross domestic product is struggling to stay relevant as the world continues on. And so for me, when I think about this, the best way that I understand this is in terms of something like this that we see right here. So this is a car crash. Now, a car crash is great for GDP. Think about how much money is being spent in this photo. You've got paramedics and police officers being paid overtime. You've got a tow truck driver who I was going to say got out of bed, but probably was already awake because there was probably a lot to do. You've got the panel beaters who are going to fix this car. You've maybe got an insurance company involved. There's a lot of money being thrown at this situation and being generated because of this situation. But I think we would all agree that we don't want more car crashes in our world. We definitely want less. And so a system that encourages car crashes because they produce a lot of, they contribute to GDP is not something that necessarily is going to help us in the long run. And so to sum it up, essentially we say that without measuring what else matters, we continue to make decisions at the cost of our social, environmental, and personal well-being. And I think when we all look around us, we see that while GDP has continued to rise globally and across certainly our countries, we look around and see there's lots of problems going on and things that we want to solve, and we know that that's not necessarily going to solve it. And so we need to therefore measure something else, and that's where social impact comes in. And so, yeah, obviously at Huber, it's in the name, we're very much focused on the social, but there's other stuff going on around the world around the environmental well-being as well. So, just going to give you a kind of super quick introduction to the ecosystem now as we get into thinking about how we might actually go about measuring social impact. So, first thing, social impact measures change beyond financial impact. And so, an impact is a change in an outcome caused by an organization, and an impact can be positive, negative. It can be intended or unintended. Not all social impact is good. There are many things that have bad social impacts in our lives. But generally, when we're talking about social impact measurement, we're generally trying to measure things that are trying to do. So social impact of an activity is usually defined in reference to the value created as a result of the activity, the value experienced so beneficiaries is like this kind of term that is used in the development field. It's really just meant to mean people who benefit from the program or business or intervention or whatever was going on. So the value experienced by the people who have been affected, both positive and negative effects, and what the situation would have been without the activity. So sometimes this stuff can seem kind of complicated, but really, if you just think about it as what would it have been like if we didn't do this program, or if we didn't run this business, or if we didn't do this activity. And there are many, many frameworks and methodologies out there. There's more appearing almost every week. So I think, going back to what Georgia was saying, not that long ago, there was none of this. It was all financial measures. But as people have realized that we need some social measures, because there's not centuries and centuries of kind of work in business and finance building up to a constant standard. We've got these international accounting standards. The world of accounting and finance is really quite well, it's been figured out everyone's got their graphs and programs. But the social world, it's kind of like there's an arms race to try and be the one that comes up with the new standard for social impact. And so everyone's giving it a go. We've got, all these things represent different people who've tried to find a way to do it. You've got in the impact investing space, you've got GIN and IRIS Plus are kind of the big ones. Social return on investment is another one, which tries to put a dollar value on social impact. The most famous here is the Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN's big project to have goals for the whole world. And then down here, we've got our little one that we'll talk about soon. But there's lots out there. And many of these approaches are not measurement systems. So they're not all trying to come up with a holistic way of measuring social impact. Some of them are more about managing activities. So things like the SDGs and others are about essentially trying to put what you already do into certain buckets and managing the work that you're doing. Some are about valuation. So this is kind of think about more accounting approaches of trying to say, this is how much this project or this impact is worth. And then we've got our measurement approaches that are really trying to engage, okay, what was actually achieved? And they also vary in terms of the level of prescription. So some of them are very much at the high end, like we're going to be talking about today, like principles and aims, kind of theories about what good measurement is. Some of them are more frameworks. So they've got a specific way that they conceptualize impact, and they're starting to identify specific dimensions and principles for how that should be put into practice. Some of them are the next level down to methodologies, where they've got a clear way of applying a framework, and that's what they expect you to buy into. Then there are standards, which are more compliance requirements. They're prescribed or specific practice is described. And then we've got metrics and indicators. So then standardized factors, which are used to measure, track, or compare impact. So everyone's trying to like build out something that can contribute, and they're aiming it at different levels. And some of them, these ones down here, are like really specific and might just give you, something really particular that you need to do. Some of these up the top are more guidelines pushing you in the right direction. But these approaches generally fall into one of two buckets. And so there's accounting-based and science-based. So as you can imagine, because financial impact has been the measure for so long, a lot of the people that are pushing for a change, they want to change, but they don't necessarily want to change too much. They want to be able to align it with the existing system. And so that's why we end up with a lot of accounting-based things. They're really about counting the number of activities. They're used for things like trying to screen investments. They're generally done in a linear way. They focus on outputs. So how many people have done this activity, how many mosquito nets have been provided, how many meals have been eaten. They're very much trying to standardize. They generally only focus on positive impact. They map to metrics catalogs. So what we mean by this is they're trying to find existing things that we have data on and just kind of counting those things. There's a real focus on quantitative, so we mean numbers. And their goal is really to simplify and over-standardize. They're not largely considered around the ethics of the process. So it's very much about not trying to add as little new things as possible, trying to work as much as possible with existing data and count it, for want of a better word. That's the oversimplified version. And, you're probably getting a feeling that maybe we're not as in love with these approaches, but there is a real reason for doing them, right? That, the people who are in this camp are saying, look, we don't have time, energy, space to go ahead and try and create a whole new field and then map it back to what we do. We need to, as quickly as possible, move to a standardized approach so we can all agree on what good social impact is, and we can all move forward.
But also, Simon, just to add, I feel like if this is this linear way of doing business for so long, and if
Mm,
that's ingrained in us as business owners, being able to shift into this next phase that we're going to talk about in the other
mm.
bucket, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to
Absolutely,
shift
absolutely.
your value system, your mindset. And so just having these little approaches that are aligned with where you are already can
Mm.
then move you into this next bucket that I'm excited to hear about more about. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly, exactly. And so then the other types of approaches are science-based. So they think of it less as we're going to count what's happened, we're going to screen what's happened. It's more about saying, okay, we've got a theory, an impact thesis of what we think is going to happen, and that's our hypothesis, and we're going to rigorously test that theory to see if that's true. They require us to take a systematic approach to things. They're looking at the outcomes and overall impact. So not just those outputs, those numbers of things that have happened. They're looking for actually the deeper impact that is happening on people. They need to be contextual because they need to understand, what's going on for the specific people involved. They're looking at the net effect, so recognizing there's an interconnectedness of factors, and that there might be, just because we improve you over here doesn't mean that you're going up everywhere. You might also be going down over here. They're about monitoring and evaluating. They consider not just the numbers, the quantitative, but also the qualitative. So that's like we might ask people open feedback questions, take into account how their personal experience and how they talk about it. They allow for variation in context. So we're not, there's not that focus on over standardization. There's the attempt to apply causal attribution to be able to say, okay, without that this specific intervention actually hadn't had this impact. And there's generally an ethical review process to make sure that no harm is being done in the approach. And so this is where we sit. So in terms of the way Huber Social does measurement, we prefer a science-based approach. Our main concern is that the accounting approaches often look to monetize social impact, to put a dollar figure on social programs. And we worry that that's not a shift enough. That takes us back to the core problem of making decisions based on financial criteria and can lead us into some of the same traps. But also, these accounting-based methods generally use proxies and make assumptions about how people are feeling. So, as an example, rather than asking people, okay, how are you? How is your well-being? There are ways that we can go about this. They generally would say, okay, let's look at your level of education, or let's look at your income, or let's look at the suburb you live in. I think we all know someone who ticks all the boxes, but is still not doing well in life, right? And so we find that, these methods that use proxies, they make assumptions about how well a person is doing in their life. And that's not always correct. And the scientific method also seeks to understand rather than to impose a particular viewpoint or ideology. So generally, when we'll talk about this a bit more soon, but it's really the goal here is not to say you need this to have a good life. It's about understanding what a good life is to the people that we're measuring. But that said, for all our, we prefer science-based approaches, but they also need to be fit for purpose. And so whoever is using it, the level of rigor and accuracy of the measurement needs to be commensurate with the potential consequences for the people impacted. So for example, we sometimes do social impact measurement for like big organizations. They're running, say, $1 million programs. And so if they are going to make a decision to say, stop $1 million program because our measurement says it's not working, we need to have a really high level of rigor. We need to be very confident in our findings if an organization is going to say we're going to stop this program, because if we're wrong and actually it was a great program and they're ending it, then real harm could be done. And so we want to have a really high level of rigor and accuracy. But equally, if we work with organizations who we work with businesses where we're doing employee satisfaction programs or employee well-being programs, and the decision that they're making is whether or not to run a yoga program, right? And so it's like the level of data we want to have to say yes, we're going to do yoga, no, we're not going to do yoga. We can have a lot lower level of rigor and accuracy of the data, because the decision that's being made. I mean, I don't want to denigrate I'm sure that for many people, if their corporate took away their yoga program, they'd be very sad. But it's not kind of the same level of problem and potential consequence that we're talking about. So I don't know. Sorry, poor yoga is catching some strays there. I didn't mean
No,
to
but we do have a
do that.
question here, and so the person who wrote this, if you want to also add a little bit more and kind of flesh this out a little bit, but the question is, presumably this is not an either or approach. And
Yeah,
then there's
absolutely.
yeah, the New Zealand Treasury has, and there's a link to NZ's Economy of Higher Living Standards or our Living Standards Framework, which talks a little bit more about well-being as well.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So definitely not an either or approach. I don't have the slide in this deck, but we have a slide that we talk about how these things work together. So often, for example, say internally in a business, we might talk about how the well-being of your employees has a massive impact on their performance at your business. And so it's a virtuous circle where if a business is encouraging employee well-being, then that could lead to better business performance. Similarly, we work with organizations who want to understand the impact of their work on the community they're working in so they can de-risk their work, because if their work is going to have negative impacts for the community, that can mean that people won't want to work for them in the long term. And so, that can have all these negative implications for them too. So definitely not an either or. And these things can definitely often work together. And yeah, New Zealand is actually like world leading in this area. So, kind of talking to people who are already ahead of the game. But yeah, and so the well-being framework that New Zealand uses is yeah, very much at the one of the leaders in the field. Um, so coming back to measurement being fit for purpose, the measures need to be relevant to the decision and the context from the perspective of people impacted. We'll talk about that more, but we want to make sure that measurement that we're undertaking is actually going to have, be relevant and be positive for the people that are impacted by the work that is being done. And the most important thing is the approach tests the hypothesis from impact to outcomes to activities. So essentially, if this is the whole point of the process is we're saying we think this is going to happen, and now we're going to test if it did. And so if the approach doesn't test that, then it's not fit for purpose. And so we always need to be making sure that we're going to get the answers that we want. So, which brings us to the social impact measurement principles. And so this is where we're going to reflect on what a good approach to social impact measurement looks like and what it involves. And so if you remember that slide I said before, about the different levels of prescription, we're very much operating at that higher level here of saying these are some goals that we set for social impact measurement. So as I was saying before, we led the drafting of the Standards Australia Handbook. There's a couple of these around the world now, which are essentially guides to social impact measurement, where there isn't one in New Zealand right now. So, if you want to write one, I highly suggest it. Although, to be honest, it wasn't. It's not always the most fun process. But yeah, so this is a bit of just a shout out. Because it's owned by Standards Australia, it's not something that we can give to you, and so you can buy it from the Standards Australia website if you would like to. We also run a course in social impact measurement if anyone is more interested and wants to get involved. But yes, so we're going to run through the principles now. And so the idea with these principles is that they allow us to test if a measurement approach is fit for purpose. And so the more that a social impact measurement approach adheres to these principles, the more likely it is to provide robust and meaningful data and insights. And so don't worry too much about reading them all here because we're going to go through them one by one. But those are the 8 principles. And so it's about taking us from a high level all the way through to the different qualities that we want to see from a measurement approach. So the first principle is that the measurement approach treats well-being as the overall goal. And so it's worth stopping here to maybe reflect on what we mean by well-being, because this is one of those terms now that is being totally overused. Georgia just got back from a holiday in Bali. I'm sure there was a lot of talk of well-being there. You know,
Simon, the well-being was off the hook coming out of every pore. That's all I
yeah,
have to
yeah.
say.
And you go to the pharmacy now, they're trying to sell you all sorts of products that will help your well-being. And so, when we talk about well-being, we're not talking about wellness. We're talking about an overall holistic state of functioning. So it's about how you are doing in your life overall. And essentially, the reason that more and more social impact measurements frameworks are coming back to well-being is because essentially, if you think about any social program or anything really that you're trying to do in your life, it could be if you ask about why you do the things that you do, maybe why do you work where you work? Why do you have the hobbies that you have? Social programs, like why do these exist? Generally, what we're thinking about is if you ask why far enough back, you go, why do you do that? Why do you do that? Why do you do that? Eventually, you'll get back to, well, I just want to have a good life. I just want to live a good life. I want to improve my life. It makes me happy, these sorts of things. And so then we had, people had to figure out a way to measure that. And well-being was where they landed on this concept that measures that kind of how you are doing in life overall. And so there's different ways of going about doing that we'll talk about in a second. But the reason that this principle is the first principle, which is measure in terms of well-being, is because if you're measuring the impact of something on people, we need to have that overall view because of what I said earlier about we don't want to assume that a change in one area is a positive in all areas. So a lot of traditional evaluation or measurement has approached saying, well, we're trying to do X, and so we'll see how well we do X. It's like we are trying to feed the homeless, so we'll see how effective we are at feeding people who are homeless. But it doesn't necessarily consider whether a program that you're running in one area is having negative effects on the other area. And so that's why you need to take that overall picture to understand, okay, well, are we missing anything in this? It might also be, it's not just that worry that you might be improving one thing but hurting another area. It might also just be that the thing that you're working on is not as important as you think it is. But actually, you're working so hard to provide a certain thing to people, and actually that's not the thing that's going to change their life. They are doing fine in that area. And so if you've just got this narrow view on what you do, you might miss that broader context. And so we ask questions like, does the measurement approach look at the whole person, or does it focus on a particular aspect of interest? What else might be important to the people being impacted in their context? What assumptions are we making implicitly or explicitly about what is important to the well-being of the people impacted? This one is going to come up a lot as we go through, because this idea is really that we want to make sure that we're not assuming what is important to people. We're finding out from them. So the next one is around measuring well-being in terms of subjective well-being. So, this one's so important, we put it in twice. But when we talk about subjective well-being, what we mean is how a person feels about how their life is. So going back to that, that example I gave before, we're not making assumptions that a person has a good life because of all these criteria that we think they meet. We are asking them how they're doing, and we are evaluating it that way. So at Huber, to measure subjective well-being, we use a satisfaction with life scale. And so this is a set of 5 questions that we ask people that gives them a score for overall satisfaction with life. And that's how we measure subjective well-being. So essentially finding out how someone feels about their past, present, and future. But there are other approaches that people use to measure subjective well-being. And so, but the point is that you actually have to ask people how they are, because if we make assumptions, we can miss things. So the questions that we ask here are, does the measurement approach have an overarching measure of well-being? Does that allow us to understand how different components or drivers of well-being contribute to the overall results? So that's the next layer, which is to say it's great to know how someone's doing overall. That's really important. But we also then need to understand what contributes to what's going on for them overall. And so if we have a solid measure of subjective well-being, we can do that analysis and that work. There's that question again from the last one. What assumptions are we making about the importance of each of the things? So And are we telling people what their level of well-being is, or are we letting them tell us? So that's kind of the key thing, right? So it's really just about finding out from them directly.
Simon, we have a really good question in here.
Yeah.
And also there's a little bit, I'm having a little private conversation with Sophia in here. We're blowing up about, our indigenous culture here in
Mm.
Aotearoa.
Yeah.
But the question is, who should set the framework for specific groups, particularly indigenous people or people of non-Western cultures? And I think that's a really good, sensitive question that we have these
Absolutely.
days.
This is
Yeah.
like a really you really set me up with a great segue there, Georgia, because the next the next principle of the measurement is that it should measure the lived experience of people. And so absolutely that is a huge part of what we're talking about. Oh, actually, it's not quite as good because the next one is actually about cultural safety as well. So that needs to be embedded throughout the process. So let's go to this one then. So yeah, cultural safety is hugely important, and it kind of builds off that last one about the lived experience piece. But it's about making sure that cultural safety is embedded throughout the whole measurement process, from concept to design, to implementation, to analysis and reporting. And so that question is a really important one because uh, for us, a cultural safety lens is very much, it's very holistic, and it's about absolutely, it involves every stage of the process. And so that includes like who is in charge of the concept, who is in charge of the design. And so absolutely, when we're working with any group really, uh, First Nations or otherwise, we really believe that the people who are being impacted should be involved in the design of the measurement framework, and that's absolutely vital. And I think some people see this as kind of a political thing of like, or viewing it through that way, but we really view it more from about being about the success of what you're going to do. That essentially your framework is going to be much more effective if if the people who are actually going to be using it and utilizing it have been involved in its creation and also have buy into the process, right? Because if the people that you're expecting to take part in the measurement don't think it's worthwhile or valuable, it's not going to succeed. So there's both a really important point here, not only from the principle level of saying that it's really important that all activities are culturally safe, that we respect the cultural values and perspectives of those doing or commissioning the measurement. Sorry, of those people impacted, not just of those who are doing or commissioning the measurement. And are we allowing? It's really important to allow the people impacted to express their own view, and rather than trying to fit it into ours. And it's really important that we have mechanisms that actually check. So we're not just saying, "Oh, we know what we're doing," and so we can be sure that it's culturally safe. Which I think is a trap a lot of us fall into, and more than happy to say that it's a trap I've felt into before, where we say, "Well, we're good at this, so we can be sure that we're doing it the right way." But often, mistakes can still be made, and so you need to have mechanisms that's actually are checking all the time that everyone is on board and appreciative of the approach. So yeah, that's absolutely vital. And yeah, again, something that Aotearoa is ahead of the game in terms of the way that Maori people were involved in the creation of the living standards framework. But yeah, as I was saying, this also kind of speaks into what we've already talked about in terms of the lived experience. So making sure that the measurement approach that we're utilizing actually is able to measure the lived experience of people that are impacted by whatever is being measured. So, this is going back to some of what we talked about. Does the measurement approach rely on proxies or indirect data, or does it seek to understand how people experience their lives from the people themselves? What assumptions are we making? So then the next one is that the measurement approach needs to be actionable. So this one, I think, is not, it's not, I think it should be taken for granted, but it isn't always realized. I think especially there's a lot of people who like to know things. And so, they want to do the research or do the measurement just to understand things. But we think it's really important that things are actioned, that there's a lot of time and energy that goes into doing measurement, and especially generally for the people impacted, right? So you're running a program, measurement will generally involve taking up the time of the people in the program in one way or another. And so we want to make sure that if we're putting all this energy and focus into it and asking people to give their time to be a part of it, that the results are actually usable and that they contribute to change and that they're meaningful. So we are questions we can ask are, do they provide insights and data that support action and improvement? Or does it just admire the problem? This is like a real, I think something that we do all too often, especially in the social space, but I think in businesses and elsewhere as well, is we just love to look at the problem, talk about it, think about it, just walk around it a few times, do a little promenade around the problem, as opposed to actually trying to find a way to solve the problem and take action that actually improves whatever the problem is. And so we asked, does the measurement allow the impact of any actions or improvements to be measured? So I think it's really important making sure that, okay, if we do all this work, we go through this measurement process, that actually when we get to the other side, we are going to have something to show for it that decision makers can take into account and take some action on.
There's an interesting question here in the Q&A.
Oh, yeah, great.
Just wondering, in terms of finding out from people, example, asking about life satisfaction, well-being, etc., and measurement in general, what does this look like in practice for working with children under the age of 12, and in particular younger ones, 1 to 5? Example, open-ended art classes that support critical thinking, self-esteem, decision-making, etc. That's a
Yeah,
little one.
absolutely. Yeah, just
Yeah.
what do we got? We've got 23 minutes. No, so I think, yeah, it's definitely a challenge as you get younger and younger, and there are different methodologies that exist. It also kind of depends on if we go back to that question around something being fit for purpose, and being an approach being right for the thing that is being measured. I think it's also good to reflect on what level of confidence do we need to have that these activities are good um, for the young people involved versus what are the risks of doing measurement, or the difficulties of doing measurement. So just to answer quickly, so we at Huber Social, our main tool that we use are surveys. And so essentially we get people to do a survey before an activity and then again after, and then we compare the results. And so we will do survey measurement with children as young as 8, and supported by, as long as they're supported by, say, a teacher or parent or a leader or someone who can support them through that process and help them if they have any questions. For younger than that, we don't do survey measurement because essentially, just don't think it's appropriate or effective. And so there's a range of methodologies that are used, whether that's through facilitated conversations with people, essentially focus groups, but that sounds like you don't call it that when you're working with children. And so, but different there's different methodologies for engaging young people. I suppose the flip side I would say is that the activities that are being described there, the bigger question for me would be, say, are there any risks associated with doing that? And so if there aren't risks for the children that are taking part, then and we can be pretty sure that the activity itself is going to be a positive one, then I suppose the main reason for doing the measurement would be about trying to provide great evidence for the importance of these activities. And so, and how useful they can be and the power of them. And I think you just need to balance, I suppose, it's just finding that balance between how difficult it will be to get that evidence versus, and say the impact, will it be imposing on the kids and that sort of thing versus what you'll be able to do with that evidence, right? And so, and with something like that, my first thought would be that there's probably existing evidence out there from people who universities who have had the time and resources and skills to do that sort of measurement work. And so my first port of call would be just starting with looking for what evidence is already out there and trying to make the most of that and put that in front of people rather than necessarily wanting to run my own process to find that out as well, just because it could be time consuming and difficult. But yeah, and especially I think one of the things about social impact measurement is just by nature, we are often working with vulnerable groups. And so whether that's, people who are struggling in our society or whether that's, young people, children. And so I think one of the first questions that we want to ask as well is just around, what impact it will have on them and, the actual process, right? And so, if we think it could have a negative impact, how can we, is there a way to avoid that? So, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to scientific methods, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also keeping an eye on the time for you. I know you've got a hard out, but I just wanted
Yeah,
to, we've got to.
I was just going to say, Georgia, I'm actually like going through this much faster than I expected. So
Okay,
we've
good.
got time to indulge the questions. So let's do
Good,
it.
good, good. So I just a couple comments for you that someone says, beautiful answer, Simon.
Oh,
And the other is the results are meaningful and continuous improvements of progression are the efforts of all who participate. I love the way you've simplified this complexity. Namahi. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no,
Yay.
absolutely. I think it is, it's interesting to be on. I'll be real with everyone on the call. There's two reasons that people come to us, right, as a social impact measurement agency. One is they think what they do is really good and they want us to give them data to tell other people that it's really good. And then the other is because they actually want to improve what they're doing. And the reality is like 90% of people who come to us just want us to tell them how good they are. And so we're always actually really excited when we work with people who do believe in genuine improvement and want to make sure that they're as effective as possible and continue to hone what they do and improve all the time. So yeah, that's definitely I think one of the key goals. We talk about measure and maximize. So, you measure what you do to be able to demonstrate its effectiveness or demonstrate the impact, but you also want to be able to maximize the good that you're having in the world or the impact that you're having. And so, because at Huber, our whole approach is that we want to be part of more positive social impact being had in the world, right? And the way that we contribute to that is by helping people to measure it so that they can invest in ideas and concepts that are having a positive social impact. So yeah, that's how we think about what we do, but definitely it's about that improvement.
Yeah, thank you.
And so then this next one is probably one of the more difficult ones. So we want measurement approaches that are comparable. And so if we think back to the accounting versus scientific based buckets, this is where the people who are on the accounting side are really like, we win, and this is why we do things the way that we do, is because we want things to be really comparable. So we want to ask, does the measurement approach allow valid comparisons over time across different applications of the same intervention, across alternative interventions, across other uses of resources? I should say as well, intervention is kind of, and again, like development jargon to just mean the activity, the program, whatever we did. So and does it allow opportunity costs of different interventions to be compared so that resources can be directed to where they have the greatest impact? So this one's really important to us. We think about, like I was saying, that the goal of our work as a measurement agency is to help people to direct resources to where they can have the greatest impact. And in order to be confident in that, we do need a measurement approach that allows for comparison between different types of activities. And this is often, to be honest, the hardest one for social impact measurement approaches. If you think, actually, let's just run it back and we'll talk through why that's the case. So if we come back to these buckets, if you think about the accounting-based ones, they're mostly using metrics that already exist, numbers and data that's already out there. And so they do allow for greater comparison, right? Because we already are counting these things, and when it's all in numbers, we can just say, cool, this one is bigger, so therefore it's better, right? And when you've got these things that are more contextual, that are allowing that are allowing for more qualitative impact and connecting with people where they're at when you're measuring the lived experience, it can be harder to create comparison, right? Because contexts are so different. We'll just run back. And so that's why, if we go back to the start of the principles, one of the reasons we talk about it being important to use well-being as your overall measure is really important, because that does allow for some level of comparison. And then it can be important as well to think about what are the metrics that are commonly used in the field that you're in, or in the type of thing that you're taking part in, to see how can we align to those things? How can we create a measurement framework that allows us to compare to other things? So yeah, the best possible frameworks allow you to compare between different approaches. The second last one is about assurance. So, if we think about scientific method, we think about peer review. Essentially, this is just saying, are we just trusting that you have told us the truth? Or if others came in and looked at your approach and looked at the results, would they come to the same conclusions? So does the approach allow others to validate the approach and the results? Does it ensure that it can be applied consistently over time and by different people? That's important, right? Because we've all been in an organization and then someone leaves and whatever they were doing falls over, or and so we don't really want to create something where there's only one person in the world who can do it, and without them it all falls apart. Does it ensure that variations from the intended measurement approach are identified and their effects on the accuracy or validity of the findings are understood? So that's really just about saying, if someone makes a mistake, or if the situation changes, right? If the situation is different to what we anticipated, the classic one here would be, you thought you were going to survey 100 people and then only 10 people rock up, and so then you only got 10 surveys, right? It's like, are you being transparent about what that does to your confidence in your findings, or how that affects the approach? And yeah, do you provide transparency around the limitations of the approach and guidance on how to interpret the findings? So the most common one in social impact measurement is around sample size. So say a lot of programs that work with people often, they might not have big numbers. Like we work with a youth mentoring organization where they've got, 10 people that go through their program. And so, then people will say, oh, this is only the opinions of 10 people. What does it really mean? But actually, we can have confidence if we do this right. So it's really just around being transparent about, what you are able to, that confidence you are able to have in the findings and what is possible. But the point here around assurance is really just saying that, can it actually be checked? Can the work be checked? Which I think in businesses is really important, right? Because we all know businesses, we would have all seen people making claims out there that cannot be checked, right? So, in the social impact, it's really important that things can actually be checked. And I think from the business side as well, this is becoming more important, right? Because there is, I think, consumers are getting more savvy to, things like greenwashing, or now we call impact washing, or these ideas that people might just say something and it's not true, and then if that turns out to be the case, that can have massive harm for you. I'm just gonna do a quick cough. Pardon me. And so we see a lot of social businesses who, even well-intentioned ones that are really trying hard to have a positive impact, if people think that they have been tricked, or that they're not having the impact that they thought they had, people get put off by that. And so this is, I think, a really key one as well for building trust, and really important to businesses in particular. And then our final one is, does it follow the scientific method? So does it seek to test and understand a clear hypothesis? Or are we just trying to confirm a preconceived opinion? So going back to that point of, not making assumptions. Does it use the findings from each measurement round to inform subsequent rounds? So, does it grow and change as the knowledge base increases? Does it enable each round of measurement to add to the rigor and accuracy of the overall findings? And does it include a continuous improvement process? So, and something that we haven't talked about here is also doesn't follow an ethical approach. So part of the scientific method is including an ethics review in what you're doing. And so that can be really important in social impact measurement as well. Again, depends on the context, depends on what you're doing. If the activity, like I say, a lot of our work activity, the activities that we're measuring are working with vulnerable people, we need to have a really close scrutiny of what's being done to make sure that it's not going to have a negative impact. But that's not the case for everyone, right? A lot of people are doing stuff, a lot of activities out there that people are taking part in. They're not, they're not in, they're not. There's not so many risks associated with them that we need to be careful of. And so, yeah, that's not always appropriate, but it really is. I think that's the thing that we always want to talk about is just things being fit for purpose. And so, Huber was really started because there wasn't necessarily someone filling the niche of social impact measurement. So we had individuals themselves and organizations themselves doing organization level program evaluation. And then you've got academics doing like high rigor academic studies, often take years and years to kind of produce results, right? And so we said there's an in between where we try to take as much of that scientific rigor in as possible, but we also need it to be actionable, valuable, and fast, really, for organizations to be able to make decisions and improve what they're doing. And so, I think that's core to all these principles is reflecting on what is appropriate for the situation that you're in and where does rigor meet reality, I suppose, and where is the practical reality that you can live in to achieve what you want to achieve. And I think about this for businesses a lot, right? I don't think the best, I don't think even if you've got one small social part of what you're doing, or you think that your business is impacting people in a positive way, you don't necessarily want to go and start with a full high level detailed impact framework, right? Like that's like a whole job in itself, and maybe don't have the resources to do that. So I think for your organization, your business, for yourself, whatever you're doing, I think it's about trying to figure out, okay, what does my business need? What do I need to actually tell the story that I want to tell, and to be sure that what I'm doing is good? And maybe, you might just start with literally one measure, one metric that helps you to understand what is going on for the people that you're working with, or what is going on for the people that you're trying to help. And that's what you report on. So yeah, that's we're always trying to you want to make sure that whatever you're doing makes sense for you.
And I think it's a really good point that you made, Simon, with not having the overwhelm of, oh God, I have to create this whole framework for my business now. But what is one small measure, one small thing I can do? And that starts the ball rolling.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And it's also about what's see we got through it, Georgia. We're already at questions, 7 minutes spare. So it's also about what your customers want. What are the people that you're engaging with? What do they want from you as well? Because again, there are things that you don't necessarily, you need, everything has to work for you as well, right? Or you're not going to keep doing it. Like, if you come up with something that's way too massive, way too unmanageable, you're not actually going to, it's not going to last, right? You're going to do it for a month and then go, oh my gosh, this is too much, and then you'll never do it again. And so I think it's really, yeah, important that whatever you do matches where you're at. So yeah, we can chat through questions now. If you want to know more about Huber Social, feel free, just Google us, you'll find us. We got a newsletter, we're on LinkedIn, all that good stuff. And so yeah, we'd love to chat further. But I might actually stop sharing now, Georgia, so
Yeah, that's great. It could just be the two of us.
so
Yeah.
we can see ourselves and we can have a chat. So yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything that anyone wanted to ask about.
Yeah. Make sure to pop them into that Q&A function box. If you do have questions, we've got a comment here. Thank you, Simon. It's been really good to hear your depth of experience.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's also because it is, although it's not a new concept, it can feel like a fairly new concept.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think yeah, it's we kind of, to be honest, we dove right into that into things that are actually important in terms of how we do social impact measurement. We could have kept it even higher level and just kind of thinking about how it works. But I don't know. I think for me, I always joke with people that I can make my job sound really complicated, but I can also it's really as simple as how was a person before and how were they after something has happened. That's
I love
the
that. How was a
simplest,
person
really.
before and how are they after? Like you were saying with those surveys, here are the questions before we've done the whatever we're doing. Now, what is the impact of that?
Yeah.
That's
Um,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah. I think I've certainly never been on a webinar that finished on time before, so I'm pretty proud of us right now, Georgia. I've got to say.
Simon, I'm proud of us too. And if we don't have any questions, well, if you look, those of you who are watching the recording, or if you're musing through this and it's kind of composting in your brain, and you come back later and you say, I've got questions, you can reach out to us at support here at Digital Boost. You can go onto the Huber website and see. I'm sure, Simon, if they're not reaching out to you directly, is there, a support team there that might be able to answer questions?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if you just connect with us on LinkedIn and ask us questions there, someone will get to that. You can email me directly, simon.vaughan at Huber Social. Like, yeah, we're happy to chat to anyone.
Yeah, we've got a comment here. Really valued this conversation, a real true reflection of betterment and measurement. Thank you, Sophia. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Sonia says transformation, self-growth, how they feel about what they have learned and what impact that has on them and the people around them. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we're moving into, right? And that's what all business should, yes, of course we want to be profitable. That's the whole point, right? Well, not the whole point. Sorry. Sorry. Not the whole point. That's
Yeah,
that's an
yeah,
aspect, right? So that we can continue to do good in the world, right? If we're profitable, we can continue to do good and go out there. But it sort of works within itself, right?
mm,
It is a holistic approach. Thanks, Simon and Georgia. Great session. Thanks, Bridget. Lovely to have you here. I absolutely love this, Simon. Thank you. Thanks for
thank you.
sharing your work with us and for taking the time. I know it's a little early for you there in Sydney, so I appreciate
All good.
you so much. And I appreciate all of you who come and attend these live. I love seeing you. And we've got another one on Thursday, so come and hang out with me then.
Awesome. Thanks so
Yeah.
much, Georgia, and thanks so much, everyone. Hope you have a great
Thanks,
day.
Simon. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.